The Mandalorian Darksaber is one of the most intriguing artifacts in Star Wars history, and holds a special place among the lightsabers that we've come to know and love. Recently, we learned that the Darksaber has a peculiar ability to exert its own will over the user, and it seems that the Darksaber might actually have the ability to reject users. We've covered the theory as to exactly what makes the Darksaber reject a wielder, and why Din Djarin seems to be the only wielder of the Darksaber that we've seen have this issue so far. But what if he wasn't the only one that the Darksaber rejected? What if another fan favorite character was rejected by the Darksaber, but we as fans didn't notice when it first happened? Well, stick with us, Acolytes of the Galaxy, and let's explore the theory that none other than Darth Maul encountered the very same issues that we see Din Djarin is having with the weapon, and it ultimately led to him giving up the Mandalorian Darksaber at some point during the Clone Wars. It's important to note that the last time we see Darth Maul wielding the Darksaber is in his duel with Palpatine and his brother Savage Opress, where Savage ultimately dies in combat in the latter half of Season 5. At least this is the last time we see Maul use the Darksaber on screen. As we know in the Son of Dathomir comic, Darth Maul actually used the Darksaber as his premier weapon, and used it all the way up until the death of Mother Talzin at the hands of Grievous, in his duel and rematch with Darth Sidious and Grievous respectively. Following this though, Darth Maul does not actually choose to wield the Darksaber, instead constructing a brand new dual-bladed red lightsaber like his first. Throughout Season 6 and 7, following the events of Son of Dathomir, Maul is never again seen using the Darksaber, even during the Siege of Mandalore storyline that caps off the finale of the Clone Wars. This is highly important given that Maul spent the latter days of Season 7 governing Mandalore and exerting his influence over the Mandalorian people. It stands to reason that he would use their most sacred artifact in order to do so, yet it's noticeably missing for the duration of his conflict with Ahsoka Tano and the Mandalorian Resistance. Instead, the Darksaber is left to collect dust in Maul's hut before being discovered by Ezra Bridger in Star Wars Rebels, more than 15 years after the conclusion of the Siege of Mandalore arc. So why wouldn't Maul use the Darksaber to rule over Mandalore? Why would he return without such a sacred artifact by his side? One prominent fan theory proposes that at some point after Maul's duel with Palpatine, the Darksaber began to reject him, much like it appears to be doing so with Din Djarin, with Maul ultimately deciding to hide this fact for the remainder of the Clone Wars in order to save his reputation among the Mandalorian people. As of now, there are a few different possibilities for when exactly this happened that we will be covering today. But before we dive into that, it's important to address the foundation of why the Darksaber is rejecting Din. The predominant theory that explains the Darksaber's rejection proposes that since Din Djarin tried to give the Darksaber away, it no longer respects him and views him as a worthy user. But for a full breakdown of this theory, be sure to check out our previous videos on why the Darksaber is rejecting Din and why it didn't reject Sabine. We know that Dave Filoni has spoken on Maul's abandonment of the Darksaber, and he states that it is a different kind of lightsaber and a different kind of weapon altogether. And Dave Filoni even states that we know that Tar Vizsla put his own Mandalorian spin on the weapon. While this quote predates the events of the Book of Boba Fett, this Mandalorian twist has not been thoroughly defined, and it could entail something along the lines of Vizsla's connection with the Force, granting his unique crystal the level of sentience necessary to judge its wielders. For this video, we will be operating under the general theory that Din is being rejected because he tried to give the Darksaber away and abandon his true duties as the Mandalorian leader. But we will leave room for error and propose a few alternate solutions in case that this fan favorite theory is proven to be incorrect. The first theory states that in the time since Palpatine's duel, Maul vocalized his disinterest in leading the Mandalorian people despite using the Darksaber following this, and ensuring their safety, much like Din Djarin did during the finale of the episode of The Mandalorian second season. If Maul fell victim to the very same hubris that we believe is the cause for Din Djarin's issues with the blade, then it could explain why he abandoned the weapon shortly thereafter. We believe that it outwardly expressing this disinterest in leading the people of Mandalore and his haphazard willingness to give away such a sacred artifact that Din Djarin angered the blade and caused it to begin to reject him. We know that Maul did not have the best interests of the Mandalorian people at heart, as it was his own goal to achieve power, and achieve power as all Sith are designed to do, ultimately wanting to overthrow his master and kill Anakin Skywalker, with no interest in actually leading the Mandalorian people to a brighter future. And we see as much of this when we watch him leave his own people to die in the closing episode of the Clone Wars. He tells the Mandalorians to quote, "die well," before plotting his own escape, fully expecting the Mandalorian people to perish. If this disdain was already present, which which is logical to conclude, then all it would take is an outward expression of his true motives for the Darksaber to begin to reject him. For Din Djarin, this outward expression was his attempt to surrender the saber to Bo-Katan and trying to give the weapon away, though it's possible that this isn't the only way for the Darksaber to begin its rejection process of a host. Another prominent fan theory proposes that because Maul was defeated in combat, he is no longer the true heir to the blade. During their duel in Season 5, Palpatine bested Maul in combat and forced Maul to resort to begging for mercy. Though he never took the Darksaber as a prize after defeating Maul, it is believed that Sidious could have had the opportunity. However, Darth Maul does actually use the Darksaber with limited problems following this again in the Son of Dathomir series. This doesn't mean though that Maul wasn't having problems wielding the blade and that this rejection process wasn't setting in, which is one of the major reasons why Maul would ultimately not want to use the Darksaber in combat any further. It's completely possible though that Maul simply favored the double-bladed lightsaber, but it still doesn't make sense why Maul wouldn't at least carry the Darksaber on his person, as we see him do in Clone Wars Season 5 when he duels Sidious. Even though he begins the duel with simply his red lightsaber, he does have the Darksaber on him and does ultimately draw the weapon against Sidious, meaning that he has done this before, yet in Season 7 he doesn't even appear to have the Darksaber within his possession, and as we see in Star Wars Rebels, completely abandons the Darksaber as a relic within his hut. It's clear that the Darksaber isn't important to him, but why exactly is this? It's likely that the Darksaber at this point in time was fully rejecting Darth Maul, as it no longer identified him as a true ruler of Mandalore. As when Maul initially gained the Darksaber in single combat, it was his goal to lead the Mandalorian people for his own interests, but still ultimately lead the people and assume rulership over Mandalore, something that we see Din Djarin actively oppose. Following the collapse of Maul's plan, however, his goals ultimately shifted, and it's likely once his goals shifted that the Darksaber began to actively reject him. Which is why, instead of bothering to figure out why the Darksaber rejected him, Maul ultimately reverted back to his normal dual-bladed red lightsaber. Once the Darksaber found a new user during the events of Star Wars Rebels, it may have allowed the House of Gar Saxon and the family of Ren to properly showcase their devotion to the cause and earn the blade the right way, as dictated by the Mandalorian Creed. While Sabine may have rejected it after surrendering the blade to Bo-Katan, we have a separate video detailing whether or not this actually happened, so be sure to check that out as well. Anyway, Acolytes, what do you think of this theory? Do you think the Darksaber actively began to reject Darth Maul after the events of Star Wars The Clone Wars, which is ultimately why he decided to not use it and let it rot and gather dust within his hut? Or do you think that Darth Maul simply decided not to use it altogether, which I find to be very unlikely? As always, my friends, thank you guys so much for watching the channel. May the Force be with you, and I hopefully will see you in the next video.